All right. Is everybody fucking recording
Yes.
this time?
Yes.
All right. Yes, honey. We basically recorded a bit of the shit intro, the shit talking intro at the beginning, and we weren't recording, so it's all right.
Very professional podcast.
Yeah, just chatting between boys. I don't know, bros being bros.
Yeah.
But anyways, JT had mentioned that it was 9/11 at the time over there. Is that so?
Yeah, it was 9/11. Now it's 9:14, which is a less funny time, but we'll take it. And I have been up for hours. I was just telling the boys that little Miss Evie did not feel like sleeping last night. Instead, she felt like screaming. So I've been up for a little while, and now she's obviously like perfectly happy now that the sun's up a little bit. Perfectly happy, smiling, talking to herself, playing with the tassels on my Deprogram merch sweater. Link below.
Not much working.
Yeah. But that's how I am this morning. How are you boys?
I'm doing well. I was a bit tired in the morning, unsurprisingly. Again, there's a merch item that specifically mentions how tired I am, so go check it out, teasing. But yeah, no, I was a bit tired. Woke up, did some work, chilled a bit, did some more work, and now I'm recording with you boys. Nothing too ridiculous, actually. Some fucking birds have been shitting all over where basically my window is, and I caught one of them strategically positioning themselves to aim their shit right at the windowsill, is that the word in English? Yeah. And I was looking at it, and it kind of made eye contact with me, and it shit regardless. And I'm just wondering, what have I done against this fucking thing? We made it, it was awkward, because I was looking at it, and it was looking at me. Well, okay, all right, maybe I'm overanalyzing, anthropomorphizing this poor bird.
You're like a Disney princess, except they hate you.
Exactly right. Oh my god.
I don't know. Birds are weird to me. Birds are very weird. The way they look at you, the way their head and neck gyrates whenever they move it to the left or the right. They look like robots, like dinosaur
mini dinosaurs,
robots from AliExpress. You know, just lower quality dinosaurs.
I was gonna ask, have either of you guys been shit on by birds?
No, not on me, but they always find a way to shit on the handle, like the door handle of my car. So I have to. So I guess
a bird has never shat on you. Are you fucking kidding me? You're like the unluckiest person on planet Earth. Yeah. It's like whenever a bird shits on you, that's like great luck and prosperity for the family or whatever the fuck.
Yeah, whatever you need to tell yourself.
Exactly.
Oh man! Oh yes, the slaps.
They do not have the sayings of the peoples. But I once, it was, I don't know, fucking 5 a.m. I'm walking outside of a club and there's a Junior Place staring right at me, and I go towards Junior Place, and this is at the seaside area, and I just literally I hear and it's just a frack directly 1 millimeter away from the Junior that I just bought.
Oh, my God.
So I had to clean it off. There was 50 drunk people waiting for the Junior, fucking laughing their asses off at me, etc., etc. I remove it from my hand. I give the Junior to one of my friends. I take the Junior back, and I swear I hear another and it flies right into the fucking food, bro. The guy from the Junior Place died laughing, and he was like, "Just throw it. I'll make you another one." He let me cut in line. He got me another one. It was extremely wholesome. There was 15 cabs out front. There was 30 people outside of this thing, 40, 50 people just looking at me, dying laughing. But life has been pretty lucky after that. So I guess it was worth sacrificing a Junior to the. Yeah.
The next day, you start the Deprogram podcast. I don't know what to tell you, boys. The bird shit is fucking real.
That's a strategic bird, though, because it knows you're going to throw it away, and that means he gets to eat it.
Hey, there you know go, probably. They're learning. Yeah. That's why I'm glad they're dying of eating plastic. I'm kidding.
War against birds. Unlimited genocide against seagulls.
What's it called? The sparrow campaign? The shit that the mouse did? unironically based. Oh, wow. I have never been shat on directly, on my physical body, but no, my ethereal spirit.
I've seen people get shat on by birds all the time. I guess it's a geographical thing. Maybe birds in your parts of the world, both of you, don't shit as much. But that's fucking insane. I've seen everybody I know. I've probably seen get shit on a bird by a bird.
I'll tell you. The one time I was walking to a bus, and a bird flew by and shat not on my head, but I had a hoodie, and in the pit of the hoodie.
Oh.
The
Ah, that
shit
still
landed
counts as
directly
you being
there.
shat on. Your clothes
Okay.
also count. Okay, there we
Fair
go.
enough. And I remember I looked at it and I was a bit irritated. I was with a friend, and they were also like, "Oh yeah, no, but it means good luck." And I'm like, "Fine, all right."
Oh. Did you put the hood up?
No, I did not put the hood up. I don't feel like
Smell
having a
some
fucking
bird pussy.
Oh Jesus Christ!
What the hell?
Oh my God.
Dude, I go and pick up my friend the other day, and I'm going up the fucking elevator. He's like, "Should I go down, or you gonna come pick me up?" I'm like, "I'm gonna come pick you up." I get out of the fucking elevator, and it's a very nice, like, super new building, super fancy shit, but it smells like shit, like actual poop, like fresh. But like 1 hour fresh type of shit. Don't ask me how I know this.
How does it happen that every time we get on this fucking podcast, we just ended up talking about shit? There's something wrong with us. Sorry, go on.
And I'm walking towards this door, and the closer I get to the door, the more it smells like shit. I ring, right? And I look down, and I swear, and this is a very close friend of mine that I thought was normal, and I see a brown bag from like a fashion brand filled to the brim with shit.
Oh my God.
I start losing my mind. I already rang. He opens the door. I'm still in shock. He tells me, "Come inside." I come inside. I'm still like, why did this guy I thought was normal shit in a bag and put it outside of his apartment in the hallway? Like, what the fuck is going on? I'm standing there. He seems unfazed by everything. He's like putting on his coat. He's like, "Oh, we're going, bro." I'm like, "Yeah, we're going." We exit, and I'm still shocked, and I see him just casually, without even telling me anything, pick up this bag of shit. And now, like, I'm still like, what the fuck? But we're walking towards the elevator. And as we walk into the elevator and the door is about to close, I put my hand at the door and I look at him. I'm like, were you just about to enter a 1 by 1 square meters closed out fucking space with me holding a bag full of your own shit? Like, are you fucking insane? And the dude goes like, "Oh man, sorry, I forgot. I'm kind of used to the smell." And I'm thinking even crazier shit. Like, does this guy shit all over his apartment? Does he like transport his shit all over the place? Does his toilet not work? And he tells me, "Oh man, no, I wasn't at home. And this is like at least a week full of worth of cat poop. So it was full to the brim with cat shit, and the cat shit started eroding. I didn't know that shit could actually like start going bad. Like it's even worse than actual shit." So yeah, that was an incredible experience of me completely disassociating and thinking, "Oh my God, do you really know people ever?" You know, like an existential crisis. I was like, I guess this person I know for 10 years is a bag shitter for some fucking reason. And then in the end, obviously, a rational explanation was found. But I don't think I will ever step in that hallway ever in my life again without, but through placebo effect, smelling poop. And I didn't know that cat shit could smell that bad. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
I feel incredibly enriched by that.
Yeah, thanks
story.
for sharing.
I don't know about you, JT.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. You have no, you're all right though. Cat poop is a beast of its own. I don't know. Is dog poop any different, JT?
I mean, it's shit. I don't make a habit of classifying it.
All right. I mean, you're dealing with human poop now, so. All right, we're not going to talk. We're not enough scatological discussions. Yeah. We can get on to a topic that I've been meaning to ask actually for a while. What is the hardest you guys have hurt yourselves as kids? Do you remember?
Oh boy.
Is there any event that stands out?
There are a couple. When I was playing like backyard baseball, the actual like IRL, not the video game. The video game also slapped. With my dad and one of my brothers. I had leaned over to pick something up, and I stood back up and immediately got hit in the back of the head with an aluminum baseball bat from my brother who was swinging to hit a ball or something. And so that was really bad. And then I guess I wasn't, I guess you consider college people kids. In college, I had a flying disc sports elective, so like Frisbee class, which was actually quite fun. So we're playing Ultimate Frisbee. And I was running to catch one, and there was this other like real dopey big guy, just not like fat or anything, just big, huge, probably 6'3" or so, and I don't know, I don't know, 260, something like that. Massive guy. And we collided our heads somehow, because I must have jumped for it, and he just was running straight ahead. And I must have blacked out for a second, because I woke up with the coach standing over me, and the other homie was like passed out next to me. He was out of the game for the rest of the game, but I, like a big strong boy, got up and continued to play, because I wasn't going to be put to shame by a large man.
Hey, very nice. How about you?
Short game experiences.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been hit by plenty of bats, but I've never played baseball. You know, as they say, you know, Eastern Europe is the second has the second highest rate of sales of metal baseball bats, but absolutely nobody ever even saw the game with their own eyes. No, with me it was like I've never broken anything except my nose and my fingers, and that was always involved with one or other types of martial arts, be it in the actual training zone, or be it surviving the outskirts of a small town 90s and early 2000s childhood in the Balkans. But the only time that like it was a proper like hurt yourself, not be hurt by someone else experience was I like to call it the Matrix experience. We were riding our bicycles down this fucking road that obviously is not designed for anything to go through, and at one point we were riding really close behind each other, and then all of a sudden I see the guy in front of me go around something. I don't have time to go around that something. My whole front tire, it's not a tire, wheel goes into this fucking hole, and as it goes into the hole, it literally pushes me out, and I start doing that Neo or Max Payne like frontal dive through the air. But imagine this is a very steep downwards, so I'm literally flying through the air, and somehow I don't know how physics works, because the bicycle got hit even harder, and I'm not flying without the bicycle. The bicycle is flying over me, but much faster than me, and it lands. And it was one of those bicycles that has like those horns on the steering wheel, right? And as I'm now falling directly on my bicycle, and I fall, I don't know, a fucking inch or like 2 centimeters or when it comes to the horns, right next to where my balls are, dude. Like I missed by 2 centimeters max. Like my skin, my meat went inwards, the skin ripped and it went inwards. So if that went on the pee-pee, oh my lord, I would be a proud eunuch sitting in front of you right now. It was very lucky.
Oh my god.
Jeez.
Oh lord.
Well, glad you're okay.
This is what always impresses me about kids. I was gonna say about fucking kids. People will misinterpret that. No, about kids just in general. They'll do this stupid shit, and then they'll walk home. Did you do this? Did you go home and then hide your injuries from your mom that day because you didn't?
Of course I did. To this day, like like 2 of my fingers don't even close fully. Obviously, because I was a stupid kid doing stupid things. Either one was broken on a wall, another one on another guy's nose, and both of them, my mother thinks like I accidentally somebody closed the door on it, and I couldn't even think up a second lie to think up for the other finger. I just used the same one for both. Yeah, kids don't. If you're listening, please actually stop listening. If you're under 16, but you tell your parents what the fuck happened.
I'll share with you mine, which is far less interesting than both of yours, but it's I think possibly more stupid. Basically, there used to be this very very big hill next to where I used to live, very steep. With a road that goes up it and then a road that goes down, and at the end of the road was just like rocks and stone and like a few like trees and shit. This is around the school area, basically. And I had a very jank, very cheap scooter that I had as a young kid. And I was like, what would be really cool to go up all the way all the way up that hill, and then to get on the scooter and then just go really quickly all the way down. And for some reason in my mind, I put in my head that I want to do a trick and I go down as well. So it's not okay. It's not enough that it's super steep and I'm gonna be going at like 50 miles an hour on this fucking thing. I want to do like a little spin. And the specific trick I wanted to do was, you've seen it in cartoons and shit, where somebody's on a bike or a scooter or something, and then they grind to a halt by just swinging themselves to one side.
Oh yeah, classic.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, the
exactly.
Akira thing.
That's what I wanted to do. Yeah, exactly. That's what I wanted to do. So I get up there, and then I kick off, and I immediately start going way faster than I was expecting. I was like, oh no, I'm in danger. And I remember I saw this poor old lady who was looking at me, and as she was about to open her mouth to tell me, like, you stupid kid, what the fuck are you doing? I reached the bottom of this hill, and I'm like, oh, it's my time to do the stupid trick. So I swipe, and instead of grinding to a halt, I learned what momentum was at that moment. And then I just fucking flew. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Deprogram. Today we're doing a Liberalism Part 3. We're gonna discuss some very, very interesting things, or boring, depending on your persuasion. But much more importantly, I would like to thank our patrons who make this possible. We love every single one of you, especially the Habibi tier people, who we do like this monthly chatting thing with. If you want to join that, then check out the tiers on Patreon. Likewise, all of us have recently gone on the merch, and they slap, boy! So go take a look if you want to see them or not. The what's it called? Hoodies are unironically pretty comfy. I really like them.
I'm wearing mine. It's very comfy.
So have your child or a potential pet play with the tassels of your Deprogram hoodie and send us photos of it. Add us on Twitter. But all right. So today we're going to discuss, like I mentioned, liberalism. This is part of our liberalism series. The general breakdown, of course, was the first part. We discussed the foundations of liberalism. The second intermediate part was historical liberalism and the hypocrisy of liberal thinkers, which was kind of just a fun episode. And today we're going to discuss the liberal state. So separation of powers, parliamentarism, private property, capitalism, the cultural ideology of liberalism, etc., etc. We'll try to cover at least a bit of this. And then we'll, inshallah, have a final part down the line, which will be liberalism and revolution, the socialist attitude towards liberalism and the liberal nation state, and what comes afterwards. The recommendation, as always, is Lacerdo's excellent book, Liberalism and Counterhistory, as well as just read Lenin. Not for any particular purpose relevant to this, just read Lenin.
He's just a cutie.
Yeah, exactly right. Imagine him giving you a big old smooch as you read State and the Revolution. If that doesn't motivate you, I don't know what will. I'll do a quick recap of the general liberalism prescription, if I can even use that word in English. And then afterwards, we'll get into the meat of the episode. But in general, the material conditions of local European urban center class struggle throughout like the 1600s and 1700s really gave rise to what would become the philosophical presuppositions of liberalism, which was basically the interests of this new developing class, the bourgeoisie, within these cities. Liberalism, in a nutshell, is a ideology that stands for quote-unquote pro-individual liberty, and now you can ask like liberty for whom, in what form, etc. They are quote-unquote anti-concentration of power or pro-plurality, specifically for, like capitalist interests, not for your interests. Constitutionalism, in which they enshrine basically capitalism into law, so it's not the sort of constitutionalism that would guarantee you like maternal leave, pro-minority rights, but not the minorities you're thinking of. They mean specifically landowning and capital owning people. The sanctification of private property, specifically for, at the beginning, white male landowning people, but otherwise that was slowly expanded, but it's still heavily restrictive. And of course, capitalism as the core, the jewel of it in its entirety. But let's discuss the liberal state in its history and its theory. The fundamental political process of liberalism, as it was started, was to enshrine, protect, and solidify capitalism at every single level. Now, this means to enshrine it on the state level, so it's incorporated into basically the functioning of every state institution. It's incorporated into the civil code and into the very constitution of said country or said republic. It's ingrained in the specific protections for property rights. There is a guarantee of basically like above board action, quote unquote, through legal contracts for commodity relations, of course under threat of force, even force between two capitalist parties. What that means is basically you and another person get into a contract, and then the state directly reinforces the content of that contract through essentially violence, and that's supposed to kind of solidify the nature of capitalism. To use a inverse example, the violent arm of the state never plays a role in defending workers' rights, for example. It's usually the inverse. The violent arm of the state is used to break worker strikes, to prevent workers from strike action, or to force them into work. But it's never used to, for example, punish people who directly violate labor laws, for example. At most, they get a fucking slap on the wrist and whatnot. Aside from... You can mute that bit. But it's very based. The thing that was bleeped, very based. But yeah. Of course, the other things is property rights being enshrined, as mentioned. There's a standardization of certain cultural and linguistic forms. This is used to ease the transition towards capitalist forms. We'll get into all of this. And of course, the forceful or coercive shift from town to country through various mechanisms we're going to discuss. There's going to be also this nonsense that you read. It's like, oh, there's positive liberalism, negative liberalism, and of course neoliberalism. Neoliberalism will be its own episode. Positive and negative liberalism is basically to what limit does the state involve itself in private affairs. I guess you can kind of put it that way. It gets deeper than that, but not much deeper. Boys, what do you have to comment about how liberalism specifically is introduced to maintain capitalist processes before anything else, really? Is there anything you want to comment?
The only thing I would add to your excellent exposition is, to me, liberalism is brilliant in its ability to maintain the capitalist status quo without the necessity of engaging in constant 24-hour state violence. Yes, it absolutely uses state violence, but only usually at a point when it sees no exit out of the situation. And it does not use state violence because it believes that it is a moral high ground or that it is ethically superior, etc., etc. No, because it is very often, fortunately, not necessarily optimized for success. It is not productive. To explain with a simple example, why would you use the stick absolutely every day, do mass arrests, do mass killings, do retributive killing, blah, 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 when you can simply introduce, for example, the everyday individual to something as easy as, for example, a bank loan. So everybody needs a place where they want to live. Everybody needs a means of transportation, whatever it be, but they do not have enough money to pay that off. In liberalism, you're introduced to a loan. That loan you take out for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and then you will be forced into working absolutely every single day, because otherwise, not only will you starve, but everything that liberalism has given you, you will also lose. If you protest the status quo, you are also introduced to the idea that only by protesting it, you can potentially lose it, because again, you may potentially lose your job. The distinction between liberalism and its forms that we talked about in the past and the previous two episodes and modern liberalism is that it understood kind of to an extent organically, but also the liberal elites themselves as well, and in liberal theory generally, that it is much more efficient to placate the masses through economic bondage than through literal bondage and etc., etc. Again, not that they're not using those specific methods, but they have just found a much more efficient one. And the saddest thing about it all is that unironically, a lot of people kind of enjoy this new type of stick because they don't see it as a stick, but it really is one.
Because they can pay for a pizza in 6 installments. $6.99. Exactly right. My God, don't you love the efficiency? Not the efficiency, the innovations of the market, particularly the American market, which always impresses me in these things. Can I pay 12 installments for the Cheeto KFC collaboration?
You absolutely can, brother. Sign up for Zilch or Afterpay, and you can do it in as many installments as you want.
And it's very sad because very often they talk to some immigrants from like a very developing country in a quote unquote developed Western liberal state, and they talk to them and they use them kind of as PR tools to say, you see, our form of liberalism that we have here is much better because look, this guy came from all the way over there where they actually still beat the shit out of you, where they arrest you for quote unquote opinions, even though you get arrested here for the same reason, etc., etc. So this twist that it's not as good as we can have it, but it's much better than what other people have it. Is just a play on some sort of modesty that people drink up like iced tea, and it works. But it really, really works to placate both class consciousness and to make you feel kind of like a dick for not appreciating what you have, and that is only achievable when you don't beat the shit out of someone on the regular. Even though, as we all know, the beating the shit out of is exported somewhere else because somebody needs to pay the bill at the end of the day.
No, exactly right. Very beautifully said. Yes, the meme. Yes, it was beautifully said. Fuck everybody listening. It was genuinely. But moving on from a meme, when it comes to liberalism as well, and the liberal state, which I'm going to get into the history of in just a second. The core point that they always like to push is the fact that there is this separation of powers. Within there's the judiciary, executive, legislative, etc., and military. These are separate institutions, quote unquote. And the reason that this exists, or the reason that this is such a big point that they like to paint, is mostly theatrical. Because it was originally made to set itself aside from feudal political forms, in which basically all of them were centralized into a single figure, usually the king, through his divine right to rule and all that other nonsense, right? But the difference being here is that the separation of powers under capitalism, particularly liberalism, is more or less null because the rule of capital is enshrined within every facet of all the separate powers. The fact that the military has ideological education, for example, or a very specific kind of ideological education. The fact that the judiciary is firmly planted within a civil code that completely enshrines private property and capitalism. The fact that the executive powers are basically allowed to people who are only picked, for the most part, through massive influence of the ruling class within said country, etc., etc.
And the fact that we are happy with only splitting the three and making sure they do not interact, but nobody talks about the interaction of large capital and those three. Separate the state and the church, separate the legislative body from the executive body. But capital can interact with absolutely every single one of these so-called independent bodies of governance. It's like, why did you stop at three? I mean, we know the answer. Why did you stop at three? But why did you stop at three?
No, it's exactly right. It's a lot of theater. Because when you look at it on the face of it, you see that there's, like, for example, the United States is a perfect example of this. There's a revolving door of corporate policymakers or corporate board members, etc., serving on local political boards or even higher, up in Congress and whatnot, and then finishing a term and then going back to corporate and back and forth and back and forth. And there's absolutely no barriers to the penetration of capital and its influence over these political positions. In fact, it's the inverse. It's encouraged actively because these people are the ones who have the means to be able to penetrate the political system from top to bottom this way.
If you're a minister, for example, you cannot go to a judge and tell the judge this is how you should rule in this particular case, right? But if you're a corporate boss, you can go to a minister and tell him this and this is how you're gonna enshrine policy. What's the difference between a minister talking to a judge or a judge talking to a minister versus a corporate lobbyist doing the same? There's no difference. Just theatrically accept that the other one is possible and the other one is actually encouraged.
Yeah, case in point. I mean, this happens all the time, but one of the more egregious ones recently was Rex Tillerson. He was the CEO of Exxon, and he ended up on he was the Secretary of State under Donald Trump. It's the revolving door goes all the way to the top. It's not just pages and stuff and assistants that can get in that can kind of bend the ear of people in power. It's people who have the highest offices in the land. Same with the EPA was some oil lobbyist recently. It's ridiculous.
Exactly right. So the point of us, the point that we're trying to make here is that don't fall for the liberal facade. Look behind the screen, and then you're gonna see that a lot of the similar processes that were superseded were only superseded for the interests of capital. Otherwise, it's still more or less the same setup. You replace aristocrats for CEOs, sure, whatever, or land property people with capital for the ruling class, but otherwise this so-called separation, which is supposed to guarantee your legal right to, political power as a citizen, equal citizen before the law. All this is nonsense. It's theater. But let's get into the history a little bit. Calling a particular political movement liberal specifically began in Spain in 1812, when there was basically movement towards what could have been termed a constitutional revolution. They're advocates of constitutional government in Spain. That was the first instance of it. And in their instance, you can see a commonality throughout most of the liberal projects within the continent on Europe. This hallmark of all these liberal states was specifically creating a written constitution that established some form of representative government, but not in the way that we currently understand it, like, universal suffrage for everybody, blah, blah, but specifically in a highly restrictive form of suffrage, which was determined by your ability to read, so literacy, wealth, amongst other, sometimes even ethnicity, amongst other criteria. But essentially, this restricted the legal vote in these so-called democracies to around 1 to 10% of the population at most. By the way, the vast majority of the time it was around 1 to 5% of the population that could vote. In the United States, this took the form particularly of white land-owning political elite on the Eastern Coast. In Europe, many of the times it was kind of mixed in with other aristocratic elements, but still it was part of the dominant ethnic group while being propertied, being literate, and having certain, convenient political connections. The political process that was started by successful liberal revolutions when they took state power was to try to push through centralization on one hand and homogenization on the other. The centralization kind of expanded through all facets, politically, economically, socially, etc. To give an example, interconnected industrial communities was basically a policy, increase their work basically between each other, develop road connections, etc., so that you can have more streamlined production, more regular, for example, raw material deliveries, etc. Things that are required for standard production under capitalism that were not as required under feudalism or previous socioeconomic forms. Another example would be reducing local power of regional authorities or feudal elements in favor of central government, so that dictates can be sent down to manage basically the entire land area of whatever political entity you're in. The homogenization point, of course, is more for political motives. They wanted forced either cultural or linguistic assimilation. A perfect example of this is in France, where a good percentage of the French population didn't speak French. In fact, they spoke other related Romance languages, and these people were forcibly incorporated politically into the French nation state, liberal French nation state, and also afterwards were barred from speaking their own language, even through violence, and specifically were taught only to speak French. They couldn't work unless they spoke only in French. They couldn't go to school unless they spoke only French, and going to school was legally dictated as mandatory for kids. Otherwise, you'd end up going to prison. So basically, you had no possible choice but to send your kids in and to basically pick up this other related language that isn't your mother tongue regardless. And the purpose of this, of course, was to homogenize the population, to create a idea of a national state or a nation state, to further help with the image of the process of capitalist transition. So people would less identify with their religious background or some other minor ethnic polity, but instead would identify with the capitalist nation state and towards the effort of developing itself as a capitalist nation state.
This is super important because a lot of people do not associate liberalism with bourgeois nationalism, but it is absolutely interlinked, because you cannot have a society built on quote unquote open values, but one which never absolutely ever talks about class identity. You need to fill the room with as many identities as you possibly can, which dissuade you from class identity. So therefore, it's not just the neocons that like waving flags and singing hymns as they eat their burgers. Liberals kind of invented the concept from the get-go. Sorry for the interlude, but it's important.
No, it's very, very necessary. Thank you for that. To further build on this foundation we have right here, through this, of course, centralization, homogenization I mentioned, historically, when you look at it, there was constitutional adoption throughout the 1800s, mostly in France and Spain, and then later on it spread throughout the continent, as mentioned before. A little addendum or tidbit that I would like to share is that a lot of liberal historiography, fuck me, that word's hard to say, basically Oh, actually, no, I'll quote them. They say they find that a composite elite of nobles and commercial and professional bourgeois who were similar intellectually and culturally were the ones, or was the class that had power throughout the liberal transition up until almost like World War I in some countries. And somehow this is supposed to cast doubt on the Marxist interpretation, which is, like the burghers who become the local bourgeoisie, who then basically wanted these, to suit their own class interests, wanted these changes, and then these changes took on the flesh of the liberal philosophical outlook, right? Of course, everything has underlying material conditions, unsurprisingly. And they tried to cast doubt on this by saying, well, it wasn't the typical capitalist that we see nowadays, back then, so technically, it's a bit more muddy. But this point is so stupid because they're not realizing. Marx has this point that he mentions about the transition to socialism, but it's likewise with every previous socioeconomic form, that whatever system is transitioning into another system will nonetheless be stamped with the birthmarks of the previous. Unsurprisingly. So that's why, for example, when we go from capitalism to socialism, there will be some vestiges of capitalism still left within socialism that would need to be eventually weeded out. You have bourgeois right, you have a bunch of other stuff, certain basic like property right assumptions or ideas, particularly within, for example, peasantry in certain countries, etc., etc. I don't want to get too deep into it, but under capitalism, the same thing. When you're transitioning from feudalism to capitalism, you will nonetheless be stamped with the birthmarks of the previous system. So as a result, this becomes completely unsurprising that there were urban-dwelling aristocrats who had vested interests in the burgeoning industry of their local cities, playing a significant role in the transition towards capitalism. These are the people who had capital to move around in the first place when entering this new system. So it's not surprising that they would play a role as well. Do you understand my point of the stupidity of trying to discount the Marxist analysis, but in a roundabout way actually reinforcing it? I don't know if I conveyed that in the clearest possible way that I could, but thank you, Habibi. Moving on, though, about this. Along with the centralization point, one of the ways of achieving liberal aims was to equalize regional size. For example, in the different counties and municipalities across the country, this division of national territory basically was a prerequisite for a centralized hierarchical administrative structure within the state. This was necessary so that policies that would be set up can be transmitted from the central state to all the provinces, towns, villages, etc. Of course, this was to different extents throughout the country. In Spain, this happened to one extent. In the Netherlands, Belgium, there's some more autonomy in certain cities and municipalities. The discussion gets deeper, but I can't not mention the fact that the redivision of national territory was an incredibly important aspect of the liberal political project. But aside from this redivision, there was also an equalization, trying to make it more or less reasonably sized in population and area, so that no one area could have overdue influence over national politics like it was in feudal areas. Basically, the fiefdom that had the most income and whatnot could raise the strongest army, and as a result would be the greatest source of support for the local regent or king, and as a result they would have more influence over the rest of the country. They want to get rid of that, so this was an attempt to do that. Aside from this, also there was an abolition of certain special privileges for local regions. In the Spanish example, for example, the Basque area had certain military privileges, and that was there was an exemption made for them in feudal times, and that was gotten rid of. And these privileges were gotten rid of again for the same purpose, so that one area will not overdominate in this national structure. Furthermore, of course, there was removal of certain legal privileges, like, for example, the clergy and nobility. Certain constraints, privilege constraints were removed, for example, on the use and sale of land. There was a drive to expropriate religious land. There was a drive to enclose the commons, which is basically common land used by everyday peasants to be able to graze or to grow stuff or whatever you want. This was closed off and then basically bought and sold. And as a result, this deprived a vast majority of this rural population from lands that they're required to live for their regular, grazing needs and other needs. And as a result, this destroyed their livelihoods in the countryside. So they're forced to basically go into the towns to look for jobs in the new developing factories and forms of industrial production.
And it's especially interesting because, you can see their logic at the starting age of trying to remove all previous feudal power structures, which would allow you to become an overlord in one or another way. The prime example that you mentioned being the limitation of just how much land can be privately owned, so that it does not go to the extent in which quite literally ownership of land equalized with political power leads to basically a new burgeoning redefined aristocracy, etc., etc. But they stopped there, obviously. You know, they only tried to fix issues that were directly linked to this type of land ownership and feudalism. But as we all know, as liberalism later developed, we have much more expansive tools for wealth generation than just, you know, owning large swaths of land was also developed. But because then that was in the interest of the liberal elites, of the new aristocracy of the post-feudalist system, the conversation about that obviously needed to cease, which again leads us to that repetitive but always very important thing to note, is that, you know, all of history is class conflict, and as very rightfully, and let's say in a decent way, liberal revolutions that moved from feudalism into what we've seen develop in the 19th and 18th centuries, got rid of obviously incredibly problematic aspects of feudal society. Civilizational growth must never stop and consider a particular system the peak of how we get to organize our societies. But with liberalism specifically, as we see, it refuses to go along with the years, and it refuses. It very hypocritically accepts that it needed to put some boundaries in order for the feudalists not to return, but then it stopped talking about putting new boundaries once its own class power grew. I hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And just one tiny thing I wanted to add was just to give a concrete example of what enclosure or privatization of land looks like. Can you boys guess how much, like what percentage of land in Texas is public land?
20%.
So 40?
All right, good guesses. It's 4%.
Suck my dick.
Of the massive amount
Feudal
of land
lords would be jealous.
Yeah, 4% of it. If you see a piece of land, say you're trying to get somewhere, and you see an empty field, it is not likely safe for you to cross it because somebody owns that, and they will either call the cops or shoot you. This makes it incredibly difficult for people just to congregate places and convene and do things that are not what capitalists would consider economically productive, just to exist. And so instead, we've got roads that are public. So you move from either the place you're renting or your home that you own to these isolated bubbles of capital, whether you go to the store or to get lunch or something. And there are no stops along the way that are public, that are a respite from this culture of private ownership and ceaseless consumption. Like if you try to, that's why we have loitering laws. You're not allowed to just stand around in a parking lot or outside of a store or anything. You can't have a drink outside of a bar or anywhere in public, usually in the United States. So that's just, it shows just how intense this practice has gotten, and it's something to keep in mind.
That's the market for you, baby.
Really astute observation, because when you really think about it, like there is nowhere you get to go and hang out with people, especially in the States, without going to a place where you need to spend money.
Right.
Literally, it just doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's set up
except
that
at
way.
your own home, right?
Yep.
But then there's 3 cars on the road in front of your house, and some Karen loses her shit because it's a gang meet out or something.
Yeah.
If you're not taking part in the circuit of capital, then are you really? Do you even exist?
Yeah.
It's not,
How is loitering, loitering, bro? Pičku materinu. Loitering. You don't get to like exist in a space like there's a law. Oh, sorry. Fuck it up.
Like my back hurts. I don't know like. What if you just want to take a seat somewhere? God damn.
Yeah. You may sit on the anti-homeless architecture. Please go ahead. Sit on these spikes.
I see. And people pretend that it's so much cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Like if historic socialism had done like 5% of what modern capitalism did. The condemnations would have been unending. They already are, despite the fact, right? But all this nonsense, like the future is going to look so harshly on this period. But all right,
It is.
Anyways, if capitalism doesn't fucking kill it. Anyways, moving on. One of the points I want to make in this in my tirade was the fact that penal and civil legal codes are established along with all the other processes of like homogenization. Of course, there's 2 legal codes for you and the people who own property and who have, but that's unofficial. Officially, there are set in stone penal and civil legal codes that replace basically former feudal laws or anything else. What the fuck? That was some shit. That was a delivery van of some sort with a very particular noise, so that's why I was bleeped. My bad. Anyways, so my point was penal and civil legal codes replacing former feudal legal codes and religious ones as well in many areas to standardize approaches, particularly to ownership of capital, transitioning ownership of capital, etc. A point to mention specifically with the administration of national territory under liberal nation building was that these new territories or these newly divided areas would have specific local governing officials, different to former feudal ones, who were specifically tasked with carrying out central decisions, which included maintaining statistics on the area, setting up local institutions like schools, and basically making sure that kids are going to these schools, having responsibility for certain economic development, and of course carrying out the requirements of capital in the area. So, for example, natural resource exploration, if it's on the land of somebody's, family house that's been in their family for 500 years or whatever, the local governing official is the guy who's supposed to basically kick him out and dig under the house and do what's required to be done. Furthermore, a lot of these civil codes and constitutions, when they were written up, this is really the crux of this entire episode. Private ownership is king. It was the main purpose of the liberal everything, the liberal revolutions, the philosophical outlooks of liberalism, all the dressing and all the bullshit that you see repeated to you every day. The fundamental basis of it, the thing that it all goes back to, is private ownership and the supreme right of private ownership above everything else. Specifically extending to all spheres of life: land, property, factories, resources, means of information, including news and means of advertisement, etc. This way, when you privately own something as a class, as a collective class, meaning the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, these groups could that held capital not only mobilized this private property for productive ends, but they also used it for political ends through controlling media and publication, so that they can maintain, for example, they can secure votes from this select small percentage of the population that can vote for parliamentary positions, so that they can reimpose their class interests through a quote-unquote democratic lens. So essentially, to wrap it up in one little bow, the entire process from the separation of powers to parliamentarism to pro-minority rights, specifically for private property owners, for constitutions, all of this was set up specifically to have the threat of capitalism extend through every facet of life, and to give it a air of legitimacy and a structure in a legal framework, so that should it be challenged legally, then there is already within the framework a way of dealing with such challenges, unlike, for example, in former feudal forms, where you had to specifically revolt against the king and raise an army and this and that, but now you have to break a contract and go to prison instead. 2 points I would like to say to add, I think, before wrapping up at least my presentation about this. Number one, liberal constitutions provided and promised they promised across the board freedom of expression and freedom of the press, but they were almost always immediately limited through legislation, not even just through word. They actively put in laws to restrict freedom of expression and press. Censorship was rampant throughout all of the 19th century. There were many laws passed. There were entire agencies established for this. There were officials specifically appointed for these purposes, and they kind of even extend into the 21st century. They're just named differently. Back then, it was mostly theater and caricature, which was more rigidly controlled, but printed material as well. And in specifically printed material that was directed at lower classes were more censored than those who are up the quote-unquote social ladder. who had slightly more open access, which is unsurprising. Even to this day, you see this when you read, like, for example, Bloomberg or, all these other ones compared to, like, I don't know, the Washington Post. There's a very clear difference in the ideology of it. You will see, like, supporting American interests in Syria in one thing, but in the other it will be more explicit as to what those American interests exactly are. What I was going to say as well is the thing that had the most censorship or the most control was the organized working class press. That was usually the target of, and it continues to be to this day. And that's why, for example, you don't see any communists or Marxists or even lukewarm fucking socialists on American TV or news media of any kind. The best you'll see is a radical liberal, somebody who'd be considered like center-right in the rest of the world. But in the US, because of how far the overtime window shifted, that is what's considered, allowed. And this is all intentional. And the second point, which is an addendum, this is the final thing that I'll really I'll finish on. The history of liberalism is replete. It's completely stuffed with failure, revolt, and civil wars for over a century before a meaningful foothold and a stable nation-state, liberal nation-state was established in most of Europe, if not all of Europe. When you parallel this with socialism, you come to realize that the argument when people see, like, the Paris Commune lasted for a month and then failed, and all these Soviets, the Hungarian Soviet and Slovak and Bavarian Soviets and whatnot, they lasted for a little bit and then failed. And the Soviet Union was a particularly shining example, lasted for quite a long time, but also at the end basically was illegally dissolved. This is not an indictment of socialism as a system, because liberalism has way more failures to its name than socialism ever has. Number one and number two, the revolts and wars and civil wars and amount of class struggle and tension that occurred under liberalism is to such a point that it actually makes socialist history look kind of tame in comparison. But people don't know the history, so that's why they feel that, like the Eastern Bloc countries and some of the socialist countries of Africa and whatnot, they all basically went away, and now they're back to being capitalist. This is not strange. These went in stages, along with feudal development went in stages, capitalist development went in stages, socialist development will too go in stages. And the point is to have optimism and also be actively involved in trying to bring forth the socialist future, because every step forward we take, again, we learn from our previous mistakes and we'll allow ourselves to establish a proper and enduring socialism, just like how these liberalisms basically struggle to walk but eventually establish themselves into the 21st century now, despite the fact that it was a political process that started in the 1600s in most in several countries.
It would be the biggest joke, but if the libs could do it, you could do it.
Basically right. Exactly right. And if you can't do it, then you should be ashamed of yourself. I don't know what to say. I'm kidding.
All of us as a general species absolutely fucking should. If exactly this is our peak, if this is really our peak, what
and
malls, burgers, malls, burgers, and what else? Like what the genes? This is what we believe in. The Kardashians and Lonely Island, or what was it called?
This is why the birds are always shitting on us. It's because the dinosaur, their ancient ancestors, the dinosaurs ruled the earth, and it was so cool. And now we've turned it into a giant mall, and they hate us for it, and they're picking at our scraps.
the bottle caps. Exactly right. That's the kind of the wrap up of my segment. The one thing that I'll mention also, which I find very funny, is that they refuse to admit it. Like liberal theorists and people who write about liberalism now, who subscribe to a liberal framework, they continuously refuse to admit it, despite it being so fucking clear that only with the rise of socialism as a political force did, like health insurance and accident insurance and pension systems and unemployment benefits, all this became part of the liberal program, basically as a reaction to the popularity of socialist political principles. And to this day, they'll try to forcefully incorporate it as if it's a thing that came with
originally
liberalism. Yes. Yeah, and it's so pathetic because it's so fucking clear. All the European countries, they started like 1870 to like 1920 is when all these systems were being put in. Can you tell me what was published in like 1848 that could have what could have had, what political movement was going on and during the fucking I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah,
boys.
but even when they agree on this, they still manage to hijack it. That's why I'm like, my relationship with liberalism is, hate but respect your enemy. So they have an answer to absolutely everything. So, for example, whenever they agree on, okay, sure, it's because of socialist thought that we ended up getting pensions, getting social security, giving women rights, stuff like this. They will say that is why it is great to always balance out between the right and the left and find a healthy, middle ground, etc., etc. I mean, they borderline. We probably are going to talk about this in future episodes, but they borderline introduced the most placating, quote unquote, ideology they ever could to the average socialist, which is social democracy, right? Liberalism has an innate manner in which to convert absolutely every virtue or every principle or every ideal that people from all over the political spectrum have, and then integrate it into itself as long as it does not have to address the class question, right? Or as long as it doesn't need to address it as intensively, in periods of economic growth, which obviously it pulls back afterwards as it goes down. But even with all of those answers, contradictions keep piling up, and contradictions are unavoidable. I mean, with neoliberalism, they happen every 7 to 12 years when it comes to an economic crash. But people are literally, no matter how much bling you put on their television screens, there's too much stinky stink and puke of homeless people in every single corner of ours. So these, no matter what I'm basically trying to say is that liberalism is very impressive at giving placating answers to radical thought, but it is only bandages being put on bandages, put on bandages, put on bandages, put on bandages. And ironically, in our age, as we're growing older, and especially for our kids, these bandages are going to, in the worst possible scenario for us socialists, I'm talking in the next 3-4 decades, these bandages are going to be very difficult to replace. So as we all know, it's either going to go downhill into barbarity, or we're actually going to do something about this fucking shit. And as we said previously, if the libs could do something about the fucking feudal sociopaths of our past, maybe it's time we teach the libs the same lesson they taught their forefathers.
Beautifully said. With all that said, this has been a very nice and neat and concise episode. We hope you learned a lot.
Thanks to Hakeem.
Of course, like we said,
Fucking
thank you.
killed it with this one.
Thank you very much. I hope the people who listened liked it as well. We'd love to thank our patrons who we wouldn't be able to do this without. So thank you very much to all you lovely people. Please go and check out the Patreon and try to support us if you can. This is what keeps us running and keeps us able to make these episodes for you guys. If you're interested, you can check out the merch. This has been the Deprogram. I'm Hakeem.
I'm JT.
And I'm uGopnik.
Go get shit on by fucking seagulls.